It's renovating,
This meeting of the Margate Planning Board is called to order. Please stand for the flag salute. Attention salute. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Tom Collins, Clem Wozleski, Mike Richmond, Jim Galantino, Margaret Gubernalti, Mike Cristaldi, Craig Palmisano, David Carter, Despina Hess, Remy Pelosi, Joe DiGirolamo, Rich Patterson.
Here. This meeting is being held in accordance with due public notice thereof and pursuant to the New Jersey State Sunshine Law. Notice of this meeting was advertised in the press, and a copy of same has been posted on the bulletin board in the municipal building. Under state and federal grants, Arthur Ponzio and Associates with Mazer Associates are doing 3 studies called Post-Sandy Planning Grants at no cost whatever to the city of Margate. These 3 studies are called Environmental Design of Bayfront Area, Environmental Design of Beachfront Area, and Environmental Design of Amherst Avenue Business District Infrastructure and Development. All board members have copies of the draft books of the 3 studies, and Ponzio Mazer will make a presentation. This is a work session between the board and the consultants for the purpose of getting board members' thoughts and questions for Ponzio and Mazer, and for this board to help with the finished product. Because it is a work session, the public in attendance may not participate at this time. There will be a public hearing at a date to be determined by us, at which time the public will receive generous time to question and give ideas and comments. After tonight, I would ask all board members to take home their books and read them cover to cover. Then get Roger your additional comments, and he will send them to Ponzio Mazer for final version. At the end of the meeting, we will decide when and how to proceed from this point. After the planning board takes its action, the reports will be forwarded to the commissioners for appropriate action on their part as required by contract and law. Mr. Ponzio?
Where's the microphone? How's everybody? Good. Huh? Can't hear as it is. Hold on. Hello? All right, there we go. Good evening, everyone. We're very fortunate to be here tonight. The city of Margate retained, after an RFP process, retained our firm together with Mazer Consulting. J.D. Felice is here from Mazer Consulting to work on this, what we think, very important project. Throughout the Barrier Islands, including Margate, there's been lots of damage. In Sandy, and we all experienced that, and to some extent we're all living with it still through today. So in an effort to improve on the future sustainability of the city of Margate, these planning grants and studies were awarded by the state of New Jersey. One of these were awarded to the city of Margate so that studies could be done and recommendations could be made to protect the city of Margate and make it all the improvements in the city of Margate for its residents and for the properties more sustainable. God forbid should we have storms in the future like we had in 2012. And as we all know, this Barrier Island in particular, the city of Margate, happens to lie at a very, very low elevation. There's only so much you can do to protect that. There are means to do that. There are ways to try to keep out the elements. We've looked at that very carefully. Yes? What's an echoing?
Yeah.
Okay, sorry about that. Thanks, Roger. For this study, we've looked at 3 distinct areas of the city. The first of which was the entire bayfront. And when I mean entire, I mean from Fredericksburg Avenue throughout all the way working west to Coolidge Avenue and the 3 lagoons as well. And in doing that, we studied each individual property. We've taken surveys of all the bulkheads, all the decks, and the entire Back Bay waterfront. And you may have seen the survey vessel this past summer and spring working out there, taking the soundings and performing a bathymetric survey throughout the entire bayfront. The second part of the study was Amherst Avenue. That area is very hard hit and sandy, and unfortunately it gets hard hit, and every time we have a significant storm, we all know that, it basically goes underwater. So we've looked at not only the sustainability of Amherst Avenue for the future, but also ways to improve Amherst Avenue so it becomes much more, it's already a beautiful place, but much more of a wonderful place to be as a, let's call it an icon feature of the city of Margate. It's a jewel, and it deserves the attention that I think the city is about to give it. The third section that we looked at is the entire ocean front. And again, that spanned from Fredericksburg Avenue all the way down to Coolidge Avenue, each and every property all along the way, including all of the street ends. Every street end has a bulkhead, a city-owned bulkhead, and you'll see tonight, we're going to talk about that in detail, but as quickly as we can. You'll see the different types of bulkheads. I look at these properties every day of my life, as you all may know, and I was amazed at what I saw out there, the differential types of bulkheads there are, and the varying heights and details and things of that nature. So we looked at that, and when we did that, I also discussed with the mayor and your business administrator to expand our work to include a topographic survey of the entire beachfront. This you can use, this is a very good tool for the city for the future. You'll be able to use that to determine the extent of future beach erosion or accretion, if we should be so lucky to have that. Sometimes we do in the summer months, because you'll be able to reflect back on the survey at that particular point in time, and in the future you can watch the movement of the sand using this as a benchmark, if you will. So I think there's the work that we've done is to the point, and it's worthy of mention now, and it's going to be used now and into the immediate future, and the survey work that we've done is going to last a long time, and you'll see that, and all this is to the benefit of the city of Margate. So the first thing we're going to do, we're going to go quickly through a series of the surveys that we conducted, and that's going to basically set the table for us to talk about our studies on the Bayfront, Amherst, and Ocean Avenue, and the ocean. And the last part of this would be a recommendation that we've gone through. We've done a lot of study on this, on various sections of your ordinance that we think need modification, again, to help improve the sustainability of the city of Margate and all the improvements within, and also other areas of your ordinance that this board deals with every month. You come here and applicants come before you. There are some sections of the ordinance that just need a little tightening up, and we've done a lot of study on that and made some, I think, significant recommendations to improve those areas. So the first thing we're going to go through quickly will be the surveys. Bill, do you want to come up here? This is Bill Ponzio, my oldest son, and he kind of spearheaded the work for us on the survey, and especially the bathymetric work. And Bill can go through that. John can give him a little help. We're going to go through the survey work for you now. Thank you.
You can open up the books, and there's some flip outs in there which contain the various sheets we have here that have been shown below.
Can't understand the word. Okay, you're going to have to hold it down, and I need you to introduce yourself, because I need your name.
Okay. Bill Ponzio. How's that?
Very good.
Okay, sorry about that. Okay. Any other information you need? You good? All right. So if you want to open up your books, there's some flip-out pages in there in the back of each section. It's basically a representation of what you're going to see on the wall if you're looking at the projector. The study we did began with an extensive survey project. I have 11 sheets of survey data. The surveys were performed starting in March of 2015. We did surveys on the ground, in the water, and from the air. Did extensive aerial mapping of portions of the city, specifically the bayfront and the oceanfront. Sheet 1 is our title sheet, just indicating what we're doing. And I'll run through these sheets. Sheet 2.
Where are you? What page is that? Big sheets.
I don't know the exact page number, but if you turn to the back of each section, we included the surveys.
Back of the first section.
In every section.
What are you working on now? At the back of the first section.
Every section has it, so. There's sheet 1, and sheet 2. Okay, so I'm at sheet 2.
Back of the first.
So we begin on sheet 2. At the bottom left is Coolidge Avenue, and you can see Amherst Avenue, all the marinas extending from Coolidge to Washington. If you look in the Bay area, the area beneath the words Beach Thoroughfare,
Stop a minute, we can't find where you are.
Back of the first
so that was the cover sheet. And I'm on sheet 2. Okay. Okay, so if you look out in the bay, you can see all the squiggly lines out there. That is the contours that were produced based on all the depths we have taken with our survey vessel. You can see the channel, I believe, is 28 to 30 feet, and as you move towards the land, you see those contours get a lot tighter. That would be the edge of the channel, and then up in the marina areas, that's basically a large flat in there. The depths range anywhere from the bulkhead from 0 feet at a time of mean low tide to roughly 3.5, 4 feet average in the marina areas. If you work towards Fremont Avenue, which would be at the top right of that page on the angle, that's there's been a large sandbar there for many years. Everybody's pretty much familiar with that. That area at low tide is dry often and is in serious need of dredging, as well as many of the other marinas there. There's, as everybody knows, Margate has a dredging issue. That's a whole separate meeting. But basically, our surveys are going to back that up if that data is used to prove that this whole area is very shallow. The next sheet continues down Fremont, Union, Thurlow, the Sunset Canal. The depth of water, say where Vendome is, if you look at that on the angle, those homes in there, there's good depth at all stages of the tide. There's not really an issue there. And as you work around the point at Union, that's one of the deepest areas in Margate. The depth out there is approximately 40 feet at time of low tide. So again, no issues there. As you work around into Sunset Canal, there's plenty of water all through the entry of that canal. And in it, it's not very deep, but large boats have some difficulty navigating it at times of extreme low tide. Especially, there's a portion out of Sunset Canal which shoals way up to about 4 feet at low tide, so the large boats definitely have an issue there. The Sunset Canal wraps around, Fulton Avenue, I believe, into the Orient Canal. Orient Canal is definitely in a much worse condition as far as the depths go. There's a few large boats in there that can only pass through there at high tide, which is definitely not a good impact for those residents who own those boats. Then the area, I will say offshore of Nassau and the continuation of Fulton, wraps around to what we all know as the log cabin. That's at the top of sheet 4. That also is a very shallow area at Margate. Everybody's familiar, if you come over to Margate Bridge into Margate, you look out to the right, you can see a giant mud flat out there at low tide. And based on the survey data we have collected, that flat is actually roughly 2 feet dry at time of low tide. So there's physically 2 feet of land there exposed out of the water, which is impossible to navigate for anyone. Definitely an issue for the homeowners along that stretch of land. I mean, everybody knows about that place being an issue. Sheet 5 takes you up to the Margate Bridge in the middle of the sheet. Again, the channel in there is plenty deep. There's no worries about depth of water through the bridge. I believe the deepest portion of Margate's right there at 50 feet at low tide, about the center of the bridge. The homes along Bay Shore drive west. There's also some water there for them. They're in a pretty good shape. I don't really see too much dredging needed there. It's obviously shallow at the bulkhead, but as you work out to the slips, there's plenty of water. Bay Shore Lagoon at the very top. That lagoon is extremely shallow, and at low tide, I would say less than 20% of the boats that moor in that lagoon can pass through there. The survey should show that the depths at low tide are about 2 feet in that lagoon, which is extremely shallow and not navigable, in my opinion. Definitely an issue for those homeowners in there. I'm sure they bought homes to enjoy the waterfront and use the boats. And at low tide, and even mid to low tide, they can't get through there. Coming out of Bay Shore Lagoon, out back in the beach thoroughfare, everybody's familiar with Bay Shore Drive. Again, the channel in front of those homes is the Intercoastal Waterway, and there's plenty of water to navigate at all stages of the tide there. There's no issues. The homes along the bulkheads, they also have water. They're definitely not in as bad shape as some of the other properties we already spoke about. But in the future, you know, I definitely see the depth there showing in. Sheet 7, again, wraps around Bay Shore Drive, Long Beach Thoroughfare. Interesting thing to point out on this page is you have bulkheading on all the homes up into about the extension of Barclay Avenue, which is going to be on the right side of that sheet. At Barclay Avenue, the bulkheads terminate, and you have, from that point going north to Fredericksburg, you have what we're calling a sloping rock mat. So there's no bulkhead as shore protection there. It's a low mat. You can see some of the elevations on the right-hand side of that page on the decks, and the elevation of that mat is about elevation 5, which is fairly low, and it doesn't really provide too much flood protection in that area. The depths out there are generally good. Again, you know, closer to the bulkhead you get, it's shallow. You work out to the channel, and the channel has water. It's navigable. Does anyone have any questions up until Fredericksburg Avenue about that? Yeah, I'm just trying to read the plan. Okay, so I didn't really touch too much on the bulkheads. I talked a lot about the depths. I'll just recap a quick couple notes about the bulkheads. As you look at our plans, you can see we have all the elevations of the decks and the bulkheads. These are all collected by boat or by land. And without giving you every single elevation, I mean, most of them are not at what the current standard is supposed to be. And there are a good portion that have been replaced by vinyl or steel, but there's still many, many, many that are lacking replacement and need replacement urgently. They're not in great shape. they're at low elevations, and this definitely needs to be addressed. Some of this data we use to support our recommendations that you'll hear later on in the presentation. But there's still a long ways to go, like I said, with the full replacement of all the bulkheads. Our office, we do a lot of the design of the bulkheads, and we had originally thought that, based on the amount of work we've done in the past and the other firms we talked to, that a lot of the bulkheads were replaced. Well, the data kind of proves otherwise. And we have the photos in the books where we tried to depict a new vinyl bulkhead at certain locations, or an old, in need of repair bulkhead at others. As you flip through there, you can view those. After the bay studies were finished, we then started out on the beachfront, which begins at sheet 8. And again, we began the drawings starting at Coolidge Avenue. The ocean, or the beachfront, will be on the bottom of this page, and our surveys terminated at the center line of Atlantic Avenue. You can see all the information out on the beach. That's the topographical elevations that were collected. And in this particular sheet, you can see there's dunes. If you look about in the middle of the page, you see the words public beach. Immediately on top of that, you see a bunch of squiggly lines and some numbers. That would be a dune. So as you flip through the sheets, you can see that there are some dunes, and we provide the elevations of those dunes. So sheet 9 is a continuation. I really can't read the streets from here. Looks like Benson to Nassau. The aerial mapping we performed picked up all the homes indicated in gray, and all the elevations we collected of the bulkhead and beach and decks are shown on there as well. One thing in this area I'll note is a lot of the decks are not over the bulkhead. They would be beneath the bulkhead, and some of those we had trouble accessing due to gates and things like that, so we didn't provide those numbers, where we couldn't get the access. Sheet 10 is just another continuation of the rest of the city, starting at Nassau and goes to Frontenac. It's all the same survey data. Along the ocean front, we found a mix of bulkheads. There's some steel bulkheads down, I believe, in front of the Island House. There's timber bulkheads. There's some vinyl bulkheads. And there's a handful of concrete seawalls. The seawalls, I believe, are closer to Fredericksburg Avenue up that way, if I can remember offhand correctly. Sheet 11 would be the last sheet. I believe it goes from Frontenac to Fredericksburg. Again, it's all the same survey data. About in the middle of the sheet, you see there's some well-established dunes there, indicated by all the contours. And all the homes and buildings shown in the gray shading, and elevations throughout the street, and the bulkheads and beach. Now, pretty much all I have to say about the surveys. That's the last sheet. If anyone has any questions, I guess we'll address them now or later. I don't know what the format is, but I think we're going to go through the next section, which probably begins at the bayfront, if you look in the book.
Which one? Just say that?
That just advances.
Okay. Where are the photographs?
Yeah.
Send me some photographs.
Hold up 1 second.
Aha. So lip reader. I was watching her.
Well, as long as you return, it's good.
Yeah, do that. What this is
that part.
Okay, great, thank you. What this is, you can see that survey was pretty extensive, covering the entire waterfront of the city. As you go through the book, in the first section, that's the bayfront analysis. You can scan through that at your own, your own time. I'm not going to go through all the minutiae of that. I just want to show a couple pictures to you, representative of furtherance of the study, of the survey study. On that sheet at the bottom, you can see the yellow line there. That was the extent of the bayfront study that you just saw in the survey. It's a map of the city there, figure 1. So I'm going to go through all the words. And you'll see what we did. We followed this up with the photographic analysis, starting at Fredericksburg Avenue there. You can see that up on the wall. If you want to just look at the wall, I'll just scan through these real quickly. And what Bill mentioned before, recently, about the first few properties, which was interesting, coming in from Fredericksburg Avenue, working to the west, they don't have bulkheads at that sloping mat. There's not much storm protection there or flood protection, but there is good erosion protection. So the trade-off there is you don't get backwash from the bulkhead, a wave hitting the bulkhead, creating scour and backwash. You have a sloping mat, which protects the land from erosion, but gives the property owner and the city no storm or flood protection. A Gobi mat system or a Gabion system or a sloping bank in conjunction with a vertical bulkhead seems to be the best way to go. That's just something for another conversation. Then when you keep going to the west, that's where the bulkheads, you'll see them pick up, and all the properties are protected, but for a few on the westerly side of Jerome Avenue. Intermittently, you'll see we've also added the elevations, which are important for the recommendations part of this study. So there you see one at the bottom of the photograph. You see the recommendations. You see the heights of the bulkhead, the heights of the deck. Behind that is Mr. Simon's, poor Jake's house. God rest his soul. You see that beautiful house. You see those elevations there. Then you go down, there's Mr. Gerwitz's house. And you just get a brand new home just built this summer. That's a good one to look at. There's a brand new house. I don't even know if it's completed as of yet. The bulkhead is at elevation 8.8, the deck at just above that at 8.7, the street down at 5.8. The new home, I don't know exactly what the floor of that home is, but I'm going to make a guess it's about 12. It's a pretty resilient home, the way it's built that high. It should, should withstand a very significant storm. We'd like to see the bulkhead a little higher, but nonetheless, it is a very good representation of a resilient property. You see a few of these properties along the bayfront that are like that. Mr. Goldberg happens to be here. Here's his property. Looks like he spent some nice money redoing that bulkhead with those batter piles. It's a very exposed point, Roy's house at that location. It does take a battering in the storms, which is why that bulkhead probably took a lot of wear through the years. But obviously, he's Roy's maintained that bulkhead very nicely to continue it and that property being sustainable. Working down the lagoon, Bill mentioned the shallow water through that lagoon. Now there's been no dredging there for years and years and years, and a lot of the sediment in that lagoon not only comes from the northwest winds blowing the sand, if you will, into the lagoon where it's trapped and it just settles to the bottom because there's no current flow there, but as well through the years as those bulkheads, at this point some of them are probably pushing 50 years old, not the ones that have been replaced. The upland fill gets lost through the sheeting. We all see that everywhere along the bayfront, and that material just lays right inside that waterway, and eventually it's like a snowball effect. You get a little bit of fill, sediment there, a little bit of fill coming in the next tide, the next wind, a little more comes through the bulkhead. Next thing you know, you have an unnavigable situation. You could dredge that. It will probably stay for a while, but if the rest of the bulkheads are not maintained properly, that sediment's going to come back over a period of time. So that the sustainability of a lagoon such as that would require not only the dredging, but that every bulkhead gets stabilized. All the old ones are completely changed out for new, and the sheeting, the old sheeting that has essentially cancer right through the sheets, allowing the fill to fall into the water has to be replaced.
Art,
Yes, sir.
I asked you this the other day, I forget the answer. Is there any regulations from Margate or whatever that if your bulkhead is seeping dirt, that it has to be fixed?
Say that again. What?
If your bulkhead is not stable or it's allowing the land to seep into the water, is there any regulation in Margate or whatever that says you have to fix the bulkhead?
Goes to-
Or
it goes-
DEP that says you're polluting the water with your landfill?
To my knowledge, there's no regulation other than a general property maintenance that each homeowner is responsible for. If your sidewalk cracks, you're responsible to fix it. If your grass grows too high, you get a letter from the city, or the city will come by and knock on your door. A general property maintenance, Scott is here. Do you know, Scott, if there's any regulation if you don't fix your bulkhead?
Well, at the dump, the DEP doesn't let you dump dirt into the water.
Well,
Okay.
water going through, dirt going through your bulkhead, wouldn't that?
They could compel you to repair that, so you're not putting,
Well, Mike, we're concerned with the city here. Does the city have any right to compel them to repair bulkheads?
the city has no repairs of bulkhead thing. That was before your time.
I think
I can't give you a clear answer.
Okay.
if you have a dangerous situation, that's one thing, where the city would come in, maybe condemn a bulkhead or condemn a property, something like that. The building inspector, Mr. Galantino, would come by. That's a mechanism you could do. I'll tell you, in looking at the bayfront bulkheads, we did not, other than Amherst Avenue, we did not really observe that to that level yet in deterioration. There is deterioration, but not really to the cave-in type. Amherst Avenue is another story. Okay, I'm not going to go through all of these, but you see the intent. You have those photographs in your book. You can take a look at them, and you get a good indication of the situation along the bayfront. I want to go to Amherst Avenue next. You want to do that? And then we'll do the oceanfront quickly after that. Three areas of study were all primary areas. My eye kind of trains myself to Amherst Avenue. I think it's not only an area that needs work for the future sustainability of it, which is the primary focus of our work, but it's an area that I think with some improvements to it, I think everyone in this room will really enjoy that much more than we already do. And it's just a beautiful place. That's just the first picture there of the city, I call it City Park at the end of Amherst Avenue at Washington. I'm not going to go through this. We'll talk briefly about the design concepts. A couple photographs. One important on the left side of that photograph up there on the board is about a 3-foot wide, what we call a rocker gutter. It's a drainage gutter. It drains the water from the center line of Amherst Avenue all the way to the bulkhead line, where the water would drain in both directions back to that rocker gutter. To see the stormwater inlets, they collect the water and then carry it out to the bay. There are outfalls intermittently through the bulkhead. We point that out because we're going to use that area in one of the recommendations. You also see the vehicles parked in the background of that photograph, how the front edge of the vehicle is just essentially coincident with the edge of the concrete. Now, this section up at the top, that is a section drawn of the width of Amherst Avenue from the ocean side, let's call it the southerly side property line, to the bulkhead line on the bay side. And there are dimensions on there, and it's important because if you look at the idea that we're trying to achieve with our work on the bottom, the conceptual redesign. So if you start on the left side of that illustration, that would be the property line. You come over there to the curb line, the first vertical line you see on the drawing. And after that, you have a parallel parking, 9-foot wide, which exists today. And then we would implement two regimented at 12-foot wide travel lanes. They're the recommended width of the lanes, which leaves us a full 20-foot space for the parking on the bay side. We are going to use the 3-foot gutter strip that I just showed you in the previous photograph. That enables us to pick up an additional 3 feet so that we can take the northerly side next to the bulkhead, cut that bulkhead down to grade so you wouldn't see it, and get approvals from the Department of Environmental Protection and the Corps of Engineers, and build a brand-new bulkhead 2 feet outside of the bulkhead that's there now, from Coolidge Avenue all the way up to the end of Amherst, where it makes the bend and it leaves the water. That would make the, I'm going to call it the promenade area on the northerly side of the street between 8 and 10 feet wide. Now, we all know what we have now. In some areas, it's only 3, 4. Some areas you have 5, 5.5 feet. But if we can get that to be about 8 to 10 feet wide, and we're shooting for 10, you would have a very, very significant opportunity for a waterfront promenade end-to-end on Amherst Avenue. That's the idea that we're trying to get to. This gives you a couple other ideas here. A lot of words up there. It just tells some of the things I've spoke about briefly. The bulkhead and the promenade are the top two. One other thing that's very, very important would be to regiment the street layout and the improvements for pedestrian crossings, for pedestrian access at the street corners. We all know what that is right now. Everyone just crosses anywhere across the street on Amherst Avenue. You don't necessarily go to that street corner. Why? Because you look across the street, there's not a landing zone for you. So what the idea here is to create at each corner a true pedestrian crossing across the street, across Amherst to the north side, and a landing zone on the north side which would have handicap access on the north and the south sides. In addition to that, at each corner, there is another illustration here. I'm going to let Jay talk about the other one here. Okay. On this plan, is there a pointer? This? Shows you what I know. Okay, there, right there. See that? That's at a typical street corner. Let's say that's at the corner where Tomatoes is at Washington Avenue, right there. Okay? What you note, this line here, it's a little bumpy. That line there is the curb line. And there you see the parallel parking. But look what happens at the corner. You bump the curb out so that the outside of the curb is at the outside of the vehicle where it would be parked parallel. So if you come to the corner, you walk out to the outside of where the cars are, you have a clear view down the street, both directions. You're not back here and you can't see past the car that's parked right there. It bumps you all the way out to there. You look both ways. There's your crossing. There's your handicap access straight across the street from you. We would have that proposed at every corner along Amherst Avenue. It'd be beautiful because we're trying to promote folks to walk from all the beautiful businesses on the southerly side to the northerly side and enjoy that new promenade. So this is, it all fits together. So we view that as something that's very important, that. And then across the street, at every opportunity now, on the street ends, on the northerly side, in most cases, you have parking. So a car is actually, if you're parked there, you're backing up into the intersection. The idea here, if we can do it as a recommendation, is to, at every street end, to put a nice little, if you will, landscaped area. It could be adorned with whatever plantings or other street furniture or whatever the city would like to have there. You can put them at the various street ends. So now not only do you get folks walking from the south to the north side in a safe way, they're attracted to the promenade, and now you have a people place on the northerly side, just about at every street corner. So you have opportunities for folks to really congregate at this location. Yeah.
How high does the boardwalk promenade be?
You're asking a very good question there, Greg. Yeah, no.
A little bit?
All right, let's tell you how that. We're going to save the recommendations for the end, but I'm going to answer that question. The bulkhead along this area, let's just say for this conversation we're having today, the top of that bulkhead would be at about elevation 10. All right? Let's just go from there. We need to have a 42-inch reveal on that bulkhead, because that bulkhead, which is going to be sheeted with nice fascia material on the inside to make it very nice, the 42 inches down is going to set the base elevation of the promenade. So if you work from 10 down 42 inches, there's your promenade. We're going to try it, I'm going to use the word steal, we're going to try to steal 6 or 8 inches more with a cap railing at the top of the bulkhead. So if you can measure from the top of the bulkhead down 42 inches, it's going to enable us to bring that promenade up a little bit so it's much more visible from the bayfront and everything else. But You have to look at that elevation. So use 4 feet as a round figure number. From the top of the rail, 10, promenade at 6, the ground's around 4. That puts the promenade a couple feet above, if the ground stays exactly where it is. Also in this recommendation would be for the reconstruction of Amherst Avenue, assuming the city doesn't run out of money, so that you can raise the street, which makes the street more sustainable in areas. Now, where you have the low properties across the street, there's a couple of them, Maynard's and Tomatoes and the Sophia's, they're down almost on the ground. That there's an issue there that has to be dealt with. There are ways to do that, but that's something maybe for a later part of our study.
It would be about 2 feet off.
It could be if the street is not elevated. Now, if that becomes somewhat of an issue, we can maybe toy around a little bit with the 42 inches. And,
If the street is not elevated.
yeah. If we elevate the street a little bit, we'd like to marry in maybe, only have about an 8 to 10 inch reveal, so we don't need stairs and ramps and things of that nature to get you up to the promenade. We're trying not to have to do that. It's a tight fit, but we think we can do it. That would be the next part of the study. That design detail, is not really what we're doing here, but we're just trying to pave the ground for that. Okay.
Martin, just to let a little lost here.
Could you turn the speaker on, please, Mike?
So that's,
Right, so obviously the bulkhead there, that's the baby on that, correct?
That's the bulkhead right there.
Right.
The base of
So
the top.
what is the, of all those lines right there?
That's parking. That's the 90-degree
what?
parking. 90-degree parking
Okay, well,
on the north side.
So where it says 10-foot promenade,
Right there.
oh, okay.
That's between
Because
the.
the line, all right, because the line's kind of going,
Oh, that
yeah,
line there?
you see what I mean?
I don't know what
Yeah,
that is.
yeah, it was
I don't know if
kinda
that's an
confusing
extraneous
me
line.
on that.
Oh, I see what you're saying. Yeah, no.
yeah,
That would mislead you a little bit.
Yeah.
The promenade is right there, right along
Okay.
right along the bulkhead on the inside.
okay.
Yeah, where it is now, but just wider. Did you pick that up, Pinky?
No, I didn't. Thinking where they
Thought you
get
would
that
check me
10
on that.
feet.
All right, very good. Okay, I'll try to move this along quickly here. Jay, come on up here, will you? This is Jay DeFelice. He's a landscape architect, works with Mazer. He's been integral to our team. He's done a lot of work with us, and he does a very nice job. Say hello.
Hello, is that okay? Okay. What we tried to do was come up, as Art had said, with some sketches of what the promenade would look like. This will give you a better idea of what the bayside, backside of the bulkhead will look like with people standing there. What we had talked about was doing the bulkhead and then having a rail on top of it. So it'll be high enough to be safe and secure. You don't feel like somebody's falling over. As the way that it is set up now is you have the bulkhead and then a foot back behind, 1.5 feet behind, you have a fence. This way we combine the two of those together and actually make the bulkhead the fence. And then you see on the inside, is this one, John? Comes the
Top one.
On the other side, you see the cars behind. What we want to try to do is to have seating on the backside, and what we tried to come up with is some recommendations for coming up with a consistent light fixture. So we set a stage for this whole promenade area. This is one that we are looking at, which gives us pedestrian fixtures with hanging baskets and places for banners. So we envisioned that this would happen on both sides of Amherst. So you would have these on the business sides, where you see more like this with people sitting out front. I mean, that's probably pretty close to what you would see. And then on the bay side, which we show them running along the back here, with the possibility of doing some trees or landscaping and seating areas, and trying to keep it as open as possible so that so we do try to keep maybe 7 or 8 feet wide, so people walking together can just feel comfortable. The other thing you see here is we've looked at a couple different things. Depending on the height between where the promenade ends and where the street ends, if it ends up being 18 inches or so, there's going to need to be some type of retaining. In that case, we probably will need to put up some type of a fencing on the backside. But in this sketch, you see what we're showing is bollards. Because the comment that we had gotten was a lot of people back up there to unload things to put on their boats. So this would still allow them to do it in spots, but it wouldn't allow people to back their cars up over the promenade or into the promenade. So trying to come up with, unique or something a little bit different was this nautical bollard that we had seen. And this kind of thing would be nice spaced out along the back with the pedestrian lights. These are just suggestions, but they do. I think the one is in Nantucket, and I mean they do give you somewhat of a nautical feel to them.
And they would be lit too, right?
Excuse me?
They would be lit too?
Yeah, the nautical the bollards have lights in them also, so it could look really nice at night with spacing out with the pedestrian lights and then having the bollards at a lower level. Here you see what Art had been talking about with the corners is some place where now by bumping this out, we give a little bit more space to some of the restaurants in the front when people are waiting. The other thing that I did want to go back to on the bump outs was that yes, they're traffic. They serve kind of three purposes: traffic calming is one, safe ADA accessible crossings is second. But the third is they give a little bit more. It was our understanding that the police department, the fire department do not want anybody parking within 25 feet of the corners. And that you always see that that's yellowed. Well, in this case, we're taking that 25 and making it part of the pedestrian walkway now so that you can't park there anymore because there's no corner to park at, which makes for a safer situation. We did talk about slightly bigger turning radiuses because we are bumping it out and we know we have to accommodate larger vehicles and fire. But we think it would work out nicely. We see this a lot and have done it a lot in urban situations where we're trying to slow traffic down. I mean, the one comment that I had received was that the way that the street is now, there's no center line marking, so it's kind of like a free-for-all. Somebody pulls over, somebody tries to go around. We're trying to organize the traffic, especially with the cars, and then make it safe for people too. We looked at a number of grants, and this will be part of your package, but all different types of grants that the city can go for to try to fund this. As we said, this is not what we've come up with is conceptual designs. With an eye on and realistic, we do believe that these designs can be built. It's not like we're showing you something that we don't think can happen. Everything that we presented could be a reality. It's just a question of money.
Back to that. I'll come back to that. Let's see if Take one, thank you. Very good. We'll go quickly to the ocean front here. Something's going on here. John, Bill. Jay broke the machine. Oh, there you go. Okay, I want to go. Can I scan ahead to the ocean front real quickly? I'll rattle right through that, and then we'll go on to the last section. Go to the ocean front. All the photos. Okay. In your booklets again, everything I'm showing you here is in those books. There is, in that figure 1 on that page, is the extent of the oceanfront study. You see the yellow line at the top of the page, just inside the high water line of the ocean there. And I'll just scan to the first photo. There's a lot of information in the verbiage there, but it's for excellent reading later. Okay. Starting at Fredericksburg Avenue, right at the beginning of the city, there you see the very first bulkhead in the city of Margate, working from the east to the west. That's a concrete structure at the end of the street, built pretty high, too. It's in pretty good shape, elevation 12.2. Very nice. And that concrete continues, as you see it there, to the west. Very, very good condition. Then it transitions to a wood bulkhead as you get to Andover Avenue. Again, all the elevations are there. What we found, by the way, there are 210 bulkheads along the ocean front, counting each one of the street ends individually and all the individual properties. There are 113 of them where the elevation is at 11 or higher, which is pretty darn good. I would make a guess that's one of the prime reasons there wasn't significant property damage during the last storm, because those bulkheads are pretty high.
Mark, while you're on that first picture, back.
Back one?
Yeah. No, back another. You're showing the elevation there, 12.2 to 12.4.
Yes.
Just remember this when he gets down to Rumson Avenue, that's at 13, only a couple inches higher.
Right.
This one's, you know, it looks like a small one. When you get to Rumson Avenue, it towers over your head. The ground drops that much between here and Rumson Avenue.
At the easterly end, that's a good point you make, Mr. Chairman, at the easterly end of Margate, in our barrier island, from Atlantic City, all the way from Main Avenue, all the way down to the end of Longport, 11th Street, the highest part of the island is in the middle of the island on the ocean front. So like in those of you in the real estate business and the builders, you build a home on the beach block of Ventnor in the middle of the town. In some cases, the ground is at elevation 11, 12. The ground is very, very high there. So you'll see bulkheads that look like they're that high. They're over 13 because the middle of the island is the highest. So what Mr. Patterson just said, if you look at that, the bulkhead, elevation 12, you look at that and you say, it can't be elevation 12. Look at the street. The street's higher. That's in the old-fashioned B zone, B flood zone, which meant that area could be inundated by a flood greater than the 100-year storm. And that B zone extends all the way down into Atlantic City, through the entire city of Ventnor, till maybe, Albany Avenue terminates around Albany, John? The B zone, the old B zone? Albany, right? And then it tapers off from there. So the center of the island's the highest. That's why that bulkhead looks as it does. I'm going to show you Rumson. I'll scan real quickly through to that. And you'll see when you have time to go through your books, the different bulkhead types, the heights, the ages, the methods of construction, things of that nature. I'm just going to scan real quickly right through these. Every single property in the city of Margate is in that book along the ocean front. Some of you builders in the room, you probably built some of these houses, and maybe some of the architects, you designed them. Clinton, I'm sure you did. Some of them are quite magnificent. We look at these properties every day of our lives, and then you get down and you really study each one close. My goodness, are they nice homes? Magnificent. What street are we up to there? Jesus, I'm only at Douglas Avenue. Scott, does anybody know what that concrete is laying out on the beach? What is that?
Seawall.
That's an old seawall broken up, just laying there?
Absolutely.
A bunch of rubble just laying there. Imagine that. Everybody see that? You know where that is? Douglas and the beach has a big pile of concrete out on the beach. I looked at it and I didn't believe it. I didn't know it was there. Notice the corner, a lot of corners out here. These corner properties are very vulnerable to storms, so the higher bulkheads are going to be such an advantage to properties such as that. That northeast corner is so exposed. And even in Longport this past storm, we saw a lot of damage to the properties. Some magnificent properties recently constructed were damaged pretty heavily because those corners were exposed. Getting down to the Anglers Pier here at Essex, Exeter Avenue. There's the ramp from Exeter Avenue up to the pier, in pretty shoddy condition, by the way. Does definitely. Brand new home being built by Jim Cristaldi, I think, that house right there. Now we transition again. There's another concrete bulkhead. That's at Franklin Avenue. Look at that. We go from timber to concrete, back to timber at the street end at Franklin Avenue. I'm just going to continue real quickly right there. You see something else that's interesting, Scott, you'll appreciate that. You see that trough there? That's your street end drain. So what happens is at the time of the storm, the sand moves all over the place, clogs up that street end drain, water can't get out. Next thing you know, you have a lot of rain, you have a flood, that street's flooded. The water just can't get out. It's something that's for the city to look at in the future. Maybe if there's another grant opportunity, Scott, would be a series of ocean outfalls. We have them in Atlantic City. They work tremendously. And it's an expensive proposition, but nonetheless, at important points along the beach frontage, they're very, very important to have because you won't have that situation, and you won't need the hole in the bulkhead, which allows the sand and the water to come in, which is what we have now. I call it a scupper. All right, let me just quickly, I'm going to try to find that one, Mr. Chairman, that you mentioned at Rumson. There's the cities. At the library there, you have the Granville Avenue, the beach access for your maintenance vehicles. You see that over and over. And also at the library in the western end, there's a very nice, nicely done handicapped access to the beach. That point, very nice. I was told that was done by the Green Acres program, I believe. Is that what it was, Roger? Green Acres did that at the library? Green Acres did that? Yeah. Very nice and great condition. Another concrete bulkhead, Joe Rich's old house, over here, Coy Avenue. Beautiful properties here. Trying to get down to Rumson, and I don't have to go too much further. There happens to be a vinyl bulkhead. See that one? That one's just on the westerly side of Knight Avenue. Unusual, we thought, to see a vinyl bulkhead out on the beachfront. There it transitions into a concrete bulkhead. You've got all of them there. You've got a vinyl, concrete, and a timber lined up, 1, 2, 3. Okay, that's a pretty high one there. That's at 11.7. That's at the street end of Kenyon Avenue. Very high, very nice. You see the hole in the bulkhead for the drain. Very sustainable. Back to a concrete bulkhead there. Look at that. Someone went to a great expense to build. That's a reinforced concrete seawall. Extremely expensive, very resilient. Kenyon Avenue. Magnificent bulkhead. Okay. Lancaster, timber, good shape. We all know that house. When's that going to get turned down? Okay. Mansfield Avenue. There's a city street end. There's an 11.7 top concrete seawall, the city street end. Very nice. And 11.7, by the way, I didn't mention it. This is all the new 88 datum. So if you want to refer back, a lot of us, our minds go back to the old sea level we all grew up with. Add 1.3 to that. You've got that would take you to 13. That would be 3 feet above a 100-year flood. The top of that bulkhead. That's a very, very sustainable bulkhead. Looks like it was going to rain that morning. Nassau Avenue. I'm going to take you to Rumson quickly. It's coming up real soon. Osborne, Pembroke, the old Deininger home. That was Carol Rosenblum's home. Magnificent. What a house that is. Okay. QR, where are we? There we go. Now there, look how high that bulkhead looks. It's the same height, basically, and maybe give it a whisker more than the one we saw down the other end, because you have a very low street there. We're getting into the area where it's starting to taper all the way down. That is, the street elevations are getting lower and lower. But, however, that's a very nicely done bulkhead. The walkthroughs, I guess all you get down to the beach, they work pretty well. We're not excited about the openings in the bulkheads, but there is a gate system that closes them. It seems to work pretty well. Your beach department, your maintenance people do a very good job maintaining those. And at the times of storm activity, they slide those in, and they seem to be working very, very well. It's an interesting way to handle that. So you don't have to walk over the bulkhead to access the beach. It's good for essentially everyone. Provided that it gives you the storm protection, then it's a good way to go. Okay, yep.
Are these elevations at 88?
All 88, David. Everything on there is 88. The entire book, all the survey, all the bathymetrics. The bathymetrics, what are they, depths? Water depths. Bathymetrics are depths at low tide. So if you take the water level here, drops to low, measure it at low to the bottom, that's the bathymetric survey that you have. Everything else on there is 88, including the topographic survey of the beach, which is all on there. Okay, unless there's any questions about all this, and I'm going to let you all just look at that yourself, I'm going to go to the last part of the report, which is the recommendations part and a review of some important ordinance items. There's a lot of things in there. We're not going to go through the minutiae of that right now, but the prime ones, the important ones that are really the focal point of our study, we will talk about. I'm going to let John come up and talk about that. He was the primary mover for us on that. Come on, John. Make sure you introduce yourself. I don't think they know you.
Okay, so you heard Arthur and Bill go through the level of detail that we accumulated through this grant process on your oceanfront and your bayfront properties. We now understand, have a full understanding. Well, we know the city pretty well, as you know. We do a lot of work here, but we have a full understanding of what all of the bulkhead heights are throughout the city, on both the oceanfront and the bayfront. We have a full understanding of what the water depths are and what you've been dealing with in the water areas. And we looked at the conditions of all those bulkheads as we went through and collected all of that data, so that we could draw some conclusions and then make some recommendations with regard to some critical items in the city of Margate. And keep in mind that all the recommendations that we have that are the result of this study, they're with the mindset that we are looking to become a more resilient and a more sustainable community. That is the goal here. Some of the recommendations with regard to bulkhead heights and deck heights, they may seem high to some folks. They may seem like they have some impacts. But we are looking at this from the standpoint of sustainability and what is the appropriate way to get out of harm's way the best that we possibly can, but still keeping in mind that we have an existing barrier island community that has a lot of low-lying streets and properties and things. So we have to develop kind of a balance between what the existing condition is that we can't necessarily control and what is the best that we can possibly achieve with regard to that sustainability. So we were asked to look at a half a dozen or so ordinance sections, or actually a few more than that, ordinance sections, and then most of them relate specifically to oceanfront and bayfront properties. And as Arthur mentioned, I'm not going to go into every one of them. Part of providing the paper books to you this evening was so that you can take them home, read them, and then provide some real feedback to us. Obviously, this is the first time you're seeing that information, so we can't possibly expect you to be able to fire questions at us right now that would be helpful in moving us forward. This is just your first glance at this, your first ability to actually see the information, and then once we collect your feedback, then we'll take this to the next step and finalize it. But there are three topics that I do want to talk about because they're important. They go to sustainability, and they are the result of all of the survey data and things that we've collected through this study. But there are pretty substantial differences from your current standards. And I will start with bulkhead elevations. So as you look, and I'm going to start with the ocean front. As you look at the ocean front, your ordinance, and let me back up one step. The one thing that we find interesting working in the city of Margate, and we work in a lot of barrier island communities, is that you have been, throughout all the years I've been working here, and even more so since Superstorm Sandy, you've been very proactive at staying current with your ordinances. If something comes up and you're seeing a pattern of applications or you're seeing a pattern of issues in your community, you act on it. You create a modification to your ordinance, you pass the ordinance, and you move forward. So there isn't a whole host of things that have to be changed in your ordinance because of the fact that this community is very proactive. But getting to the bulkhead issue with regard to the ocean front, we looked at your ordinance, and your ordinance currently, as you know, you made a change post-Sandy, which requires oceanfront bulkheads to be at elevation 13. That is in NAVD 88 datum. Mr. Patterson pointed out the differential. Elevation 13 is approximately that bulkhead height that you see on Rumson Avenue. It's high. At Rumson Avenue, it looks very high. As you get to higher portions of the community, it looks lower and more akin to what we're used to seeing with a bulkhead on the ocean front. But what we found in our study is that elevation 13 in the 88 datum, we believe, is our recommendation that it is the appropriate height and it should remain at elevation 13. Why do we say that? Well, we used a number of factors. First of all, we looked at the two historic storms that really created some serious wave action and tidal influence. The storm of 1962, we reviewed the elevations, tidal elevations and wave elevations of that. These obviously Superstorm Sandy. What we also have the benefit of in looking at that is the Army Corps of Engineers, through their DOOM project, has done extensive studies with regard to wave modeling and things along the ocean front. So we have that information at our disposal. And then when we looked at the bulkhead conditions, the number of bulkheads that are out there, and those heights of those bulkheads, one of the concerns we had was, are we too far gone? Are there so many bulkheads that are brand new or replaced that even if we do make these recommendations, you're 100 years or more out before you're going to see all these bulkheads replaced? Well, let me go through those items one at a time. The Army Corps of Engineers study, they arrived at the idea that in order to create a sustainable beachfront protection, they're proposing their dune at elevation 12.75, right in line with the bulkhead ordinance that you have in place at elevation 13. When you look at the bulkhead heights that are out there now, as I mentioned, are we too far beyond the point of no return? Only about 50% of the bulkheads comply with your prior ordinance, which puts them at, in current datum, puts them at approximate elevation 11. So you're far from being complete. So you have the ability to make this change, and as properties come in, they can become more sustainable. So, and when we looked at the elevations of Superstorm Sandy's water with regard to waves and flood depth, and the same thing with the storm of 1962, all of those numbers comport with elevation 13 providing a very good, safe elevation for your oceanfront protection. Is higher better? Yeah, when you're looking at it from a sense of sustainability, higher is always going to be better. But you saw Rumson Avenue. There's a lot of opinions about that one already feeling too high. You walk up to it and it's this massive wall. So higher is better, but higher than your current ordinance really isn't. It creates too much of a practical difficulty to the existing conditions of your community because you have too many areas that are so low as you get to the oceanfront area. So, the end of the day, on the beachfront, we believe that your current ordinance is appropriate. It should remain as written at elevation 13 for bulkhead structures, and it comports with all of the data that we've collected and the historic storm data and with the direction that the Army Corps of Engineers has chosen to go with regard to their flood and storm protection. Let's go to the bayfront with regard to bulkheads. So we did looked at all the same data for the bayfront, and your current ordinance provides for a range of bulkhead elevations permitted on the bayfront. You're allowed to build a bulkhead from anywhere between 7.5 in 88 datum to 9 in 88 datum. Well, if you look at the flood elevations of Sandy, and you look at the multiple iterations of FEMA mapping that has come out since Sandy, and fortunately that has settled down, and we're hopeful that at some point in the not-too-distant future the final firm mapping will be issued so that there's not so many questions and misunderstandings about the different maps and what you should use and what you shouldn't use. What we came to realize is that elevation 7.5, the bottom end of the range that you permit in the bayfront, it's too low, in our opinion. Superstorm Sandy itself came over that elevation. So what we would recommend is the range go away for the bayfront properties, that it become a fixed elevation at elevation 9. We're not proposing to raise it beyond what your ordinance has permitted, but we believe that lower elevation and that range of elevations is too low. So we are recommending elevation 9 for the bulkhead with some small deviation due to construction issues of plus or minus 3 inches. So you could be at 8.9, you could be at 9.1, and you would still be considered compliant with an ordinance with regard to that bulkhead height. Now, having said that, we are proposing, we're making a recommendation to split the bayfront elevations into 2 different sections. The elevation 9 that I just talked about is what we would recommend in the lagoon areas. If you look at the flood mapping, you'll see that the bayfront areas are adjacent to V zones that have potential for wave action up to elevations 10, 11, and even 12 in some areas. So we are proposing to have a second standard along the bayfront for bulkheads that would require the bayfront properties that are adjacent to V zones to have a minimum elevation of 10.0. So that is a second difference with regard to your bayfront bulkhead elevation. So if you own a piece of property and you are on the open bay and you're adjacent and your bulkhead is right adjacent to a V zone, you'd be required to be at 10. If you are in the bay area, most specifically the lagoon areas, and you are not adjacent to that V zone, those water areas are actual A zones, you would be required to have your bulkhead at 9. Yes?
Wasn't the Sandy storm at 9 foot?
Sandy storm was at roughly 9 foot in 1929 datum.
Or was it an 88 datum?
In 88 datum, it would have been just about 8 feet. Correct. Yes.
Opposed to 9.
Right, because we want to provide for 1 foot of freeboard of that bulkhead.
The 88 goes to 80 foot. Okay.
Correct. So there are 3 recommendations with regard to the bulkhead. Oceanfront recommendation, you were very proactive. You made a decision to move forward to change it to 13 and 88 datum. In our opinion, all the data supports that appropriately, and there's no recommendation to modify that. The bayfront, we believe that you should get rid of that range. You should go to that standard 9 with a small deviation in either direction. But we also think it's important that on the bayfront, where you do have that potential for those rolling waves, because you have a long fetch along that bayfront, to get those bulkheads a little bit higher and require them to be at 10.
Would that be along the promenade?
The promenade would be 10. That's correct. Yeah. That was when Arthur was going through those elevations, he was basing it on that bulkhead being at 10. So there are bulkhead recommendations. Are there going to be some practical difficulties with that, with specific properties along the bayfront and the lagoons? Absolutely, there are. We're talking about, as I mentioned, we're looking at it from a sustainability standpoint. It's an ordinance, but we're charged with how do we make the community stronger with regard. That's the purpose of this study. You as a board now have to think about what the impacts are with regard to making those changes, and that's the feedback that we're looking for from you. Okay, we put those. They're recommending the bulkheads on the bayfront go to 10, but what does that do to these people? Is it create such an onerous situation for these property owners that it's unreasonable? And that's the kind of things that we're looking for you to think about. The second big topic that I want to mention is with regard to. Is that me?
No, it's me.
Okay.
How do we know, other than looking at these tiny little numbers for elevation, is if somebody's yard's at 4 foot, they have to put in a 10-foot bulkhead? You're saying that's an issue for us, but how do we know how it affects the people along the bayfront? Which properties it affects, or how many property it affects to make it onerous? 90% of them, it's not onerous, 10% it is, or?
Well, that's a good point, Richard. What we could do for you is we could kind of provide you an explanation of ranges, meaning based on the open bayfront, the land elevation varies between X and Y. 50% of the properties are at 4, 50% of the properties are at 6. I think that's a good suggestion. We could provide that information to you so you can understand how many properties are going to have bulkheads that might be 4 feet high versus 6 feet high in their backyards.
Didn't we turn down a lot of decks this year that were at elevation 10 along the bay because of neighbors?
What we turned, last week?
The decks they were going to set the decks at elevation 11, at 10. And we shot them down because it was really...
Talking about bulkheads, not decks.
We're saying that we bring the bulkhead to there. I guess I might be out of turn now, but...
We cover the decks later in this.
He's going to get to that.
He's going to get to the decks.
Okay, so the next topic was decks. Roger, were you going to ask something about bulkheads? Mike's always one step ahead of everybody.
What I was bringing up there is if we bring the bulkheads up to 10,
Yes.
and we're shooting down decks at 10,
Well, I don't think you should be shooting down decks at 10. That's where I'm
I don't
going.
either, but that's where I was going.
Correct.
That's
So-
addressed.
Yeah, so the next topic is decks, and as you know, you have had a multitude of applications in front of the board with regard to deck elevations, most specifically on the bayfront. I'm sure there's been some on the beachfront, but when you, as I mentioned, you proactively changed your bulkhead ordinance. At the time, and I don't think it was inappropriate because you really didn't have all the facts in front of you to make an appropriate decision, you didn't make any changes to your deck ordinance. So what you have right now is you have a deck that is permitted to be at elevation 9 in 1929 datum at its maximum going out to the bulkhead on the bayfront. And we have bulkheads that are required to be higher because we've changed that to 88 datum. Now our recommendation is that they're going to the higher range of that, so that's going to make that situation become more prevalent for properties. But so the two ordinances don't really reconcile with one another right now. So we have to deal with that. What we looked at, and I go back to where I started, this is about sustainability and resilience. What we looked at is we did a lot of inspection work, and I personally did a lot of inspection work in the Ortley Beach area, all over this area of the coast, and a lot in Margate specifically as well. And what we found is the homes, even the homes that didn't sustain any real damage, their backyards, their properties, their decks, their pools were just obliterated. They were destroyed. And so from a zoning standpoint, we're always looking at protecting views and protecting air and light and open space, and they're all important topics. But we kind of get away from the idea of, we're requiring them to build them at this maximum elevation, but yet we're putting them in harm's way when we do that with regard to flooding and storm protection. So it's a hard thing to balance, it really is. Our opinion is that you have a series of requirements with regard to decks. If you're less than 10 inches, you can be anywhere in the yard. If you're between 10 inches and 18 inches, you can be 3 feet from the side yards. And then if you're over 18 inches, you're required to meet the principal setbacks of the zone. What we believe is appropriate for the bayfront and oceanfront lots is to allow decks in the rear yards that are going out to the bulkheads, or actually on the oceanfront, it would be considered a side yard, to be basically compliant with your flood hazard, or with your flood ordinance, and that is that they're permitted to be at the base flood elevation plus the required freeboard for that zone. So if I'm in an area where I'm in an AE9 zone, my finished floor is required to be at elevation 11, because I'm required to have a 2-foot freeboard. My deck would also be permitted to be at elevation 11. Now, it's not permitted to be in the side yards. It has to meet those principal setbacks still. So we're still preserving the openness on the sides, but we are substantially higher in that rear yard. That works well with the new recommendations that we're making for bulkhead heights, but it does pose some challenges with regard to existing structures that are lower adjacent to those decks. But I go back to this is a sustainability discussion. Those properties that are lower, that have some of those lanais and things that come out right out on the grade on the lagoons with those sliding glass doors, well, we can't plan for them because they don't comply. They really need to bring themselves up into compliance, and because that's the direction that we're trying to go with these changes. So we have to think about the future. We have to look at allowing people to build decks that are compliant with flood requirements and stay out of harm's way. So what we're proposing, as I mentioned, is to allow decks to be at the base flood elevation plus the required freeboard. Now, one thing Rich brought to our attention as part of the committee, some of the committee meetings we had, was you currently have the ABFE maps that you're allowed to utilize, and you also have people that want to elevate their buildings even higher, to get parking or what have you. And Rich's recommendation, I think, was an excellent one, was because the way we originally wrote it or thought about it was that we should permit people to have their decks at their finished floor. That can become out of control. If you decide to give a variance for a floor height, for a building that goes to a floor of, let's say, 15, building that deck at elevation 15 that's entirely inappropriate. So We want to allow people to get that deck up and out of harm's way, including the freeboard that your ordinance requires for finished floor, but basically no greater than that. You can't, no matter how high you go with your finished floor or what you get permitted by variance or what the issue may be, your deck stays at BFE +2. Obviously, somebody would be welcome to come in for a variance if they chose, but I can't imagine that after a change of an ordinance that you would be considering variances for that type of an application. Yes?
Besides that issue, there was the issue of the higher of?
Correct. We are.
Is BFE is the new one, right? And then the higher of is something else?
There's the ABFE maps, which you are currently utilizing as.
So the BFE is the ones we expect to be adopted. So
Correct.
we would use BFE for the decks.
The way we currently have it written is that it's based on the preliminary firms, which is what those maps are, or as amended, which would eventually become the final firm mapping.
Not the
Correct.
higher of one. So
Correct.
even though the first floor has to go to the higher one temporarily, the deck would stay at the BFE.
That's correct. Correct. Because, again, I go to the practicality of this. What we're proposing is along the lagoons, these decks can be at 11. Look at grade and look at other properties that are around there. 11 is appropriate, in my opinion, because it does provide that sustainability that we're looking for. But above 11, even if somebody decides or decide that they're going higher with their house, becomes very difficult to deal with regard to.
But those people don't have an option. The ones that have to go to the higher of with this temporary rule that we're following.
They don't have an option as to their finished floor. But we're saying you still have to keep your deck at 11.
Got it.
Yes.
That was my point.
Yes.
I just wanted to
Decks
clarify.
at 12 and 13 could theoretically be 6 to 7 feet above the neighbor's property, and that's... So our recommendation is, as I stated with decks, is that they do go to base flood elevation plus 2 feet of freeboard. And the last topic I want to mention is with regard to finished floor heights. And there's a lot of other things in there, but you can read them and you're welcome to make comments in the coming days. Finished floor heights have been a very difficult and a hard to understand topic since Sandy. The maps have changed. They came out as ABFEs, then they went to preliminary work maps, then they went to preliminary firm maps. I mean, there's essentially been 4 iterations of maps from the existing firm maps. And it's caused havoc in the building industry. It's caused havoc for offices like ours. Your building department, I have no idea how they keep up with it. It really is, it's a mess. And we are excited for them to hopefully adopt those firm maps so we can kind of put all that to rest. But what we looked at is, again, you've made a couple of iterations of ordinance changes with regard to finished floor heights. And when we compare it to the data that we reviewed and collected as part of this project, on the bayfront areas, as you know, you are required to be at base flood elevation plus 2 in the 9 and 10 zones, and base flood elevation plus 3 in the 8 zone. If you happen to be in an area where the advisory base flood elevation is higher, then you're required to utilize that, as you know, in some more recent applications. But what we found is that those numbers are all very appropriate. They work very well. The homes that were built to those elevations in the bayfront areas, because many of them were already built to those elevations, the newer ones, they didn't sustain any home damage. Their crawl spaces got wet, and that was the end of it, and they were fine. So we don't see a reason to change the freeboard heights or anything with regard to the bayfront finished floor elevation ordinance that you currently have in place. With regard to the ocean front, we are making one recommendation, because we think that your ordinance requires BFE plus 2 for the ocean front as well. And based on where you are, that's generally in the range of elevation 13 in many cases. But the oceanfront properties, not the blocks, but the oceanfront properties, they're a special condition. We have, in all of the research that we did and all the inspection work that we did throughout the time after Sandy, what you found is the building might have been high enough, but with that wave action and all the things that are going on the beach, and the neighbor's deck gets ripped apart, and it starts heading toward my property, those oceanfront properties sustained all kinds of damage, even when they were high. So we believe that it would be an appropriate decision on the community's part to allow the oceanfront properties to go to base flood elevation +3. That would allow those houses to be, the majority of them would be allowed to be at elevation 14.
Allow or mandate?
Well, be mandate, yeah, I'm sorry. It would require them to be at elevation 14, and it would put their finished floors 1 foot above the requirement of the minimum bulkhead height, and it puts them a foot and a quarter above what the Army Corps of Engineers sees as the highest point of protection with regard to the dune elevation. So you have wave action coming in, it hits your bulkhead, comes up over your bulkhead. Behind your bulkhead is essentially your splash pad area, but you still have that 1 foot of height above all of that to help keep you out of harm's way. Now, what does that do? It makes the buildings look higher, and height is always an issue in every community, and we certainly know it's an issue in this community because I'm here every month fighting about height in some fashion or another. But the reality of it is that 12 inches of factor of safety on the ground means so much to those oceanfront properties, and that 12 inches when you put it on the top means so little. If you stand back, I would defy you to tell me that that building's 12 inches higher than it's supposed to be. We just think that for those oceanfront properties, you really should consider requiring them to get themselves just 1 foot higher. Again, I said at one point, higher is always better in this context, but you make them go to 16, they're going to start look like they're looming on the houses behind them in the balance of the ocean block. So we just think that it's a good decision to allow them to get a 1 foot of freeboard above the shore protection structures that are existing, proposed or required by your ordinance, and potentially being constructed by the Army Corps of Engineers if that project moves forward. So there are the three. I'm sorry, go ahead.
When I objected the other day, I'm just automatically thinking of the entire beachfront going up. But like Art said about the bulkheads, or you said, this is a 100-year process. So it's not going to, by the time everybody's up to this extra foot, so it's going to be a house here and there. We have mostly new houses along the beach anyway, already.
Correct.
So it's not going to have the impact that I was thinking of. So I think this is something that will gradually come in over the next 100 years and won't be noticed.
Yeah, I definitely don't disagree with that. So there are the three topics that we wanted to touch on and highlight. Yes?
I'm sorry. You probably said it. I think, is it only for the beachfront, the
only
first
for beachfront, not the entire zone and not beach block, just the beachfront, because essentially what happens is if you saw any videos or whatever, the wave comes up, it hits the bulkhead, it splashes over the bulkhead, it smashes into that first house. Well, the first house protects the second house. So that's why we think that it really only is necessary for that first house. You're already requiring 2 feet of freeboard for the balance of those areas. And if you have 2 feet of freeboard and you're the second house in, you're not going to see water. But that first house is critical, and we saw house after house on the ocean front all along the Barrier Islands here that just got tortured.
Is the entire beachfront A11?
It is not. No, there are areas, I believe, that are...
Well, it's not A14 then, it's still +3.
No, we're proposing +3, correct.
Whatever it is, +3.
Base flood +3, yes.
So what is the beach block proposed elevation 12?
Most of the beach block is in an AE10 zone, is that right? Yeah, most of the beach block is in an AE10 zone, so that, by your current ordinance, would be BFE +2, so it would be 12. Right.
So now you're saying that the beachfront houses should be required to go 2 feet, should be required to go 14?
They should be required to go to base flood elevation +3. So whatever their zone is, whatever zone they're in, they would go +3. So if you're in an area where the beachfront property happens to be the same elevation, the same base flood elevation as the rest of that block,
Right.
then the beachfront house would be required to go 1 foot higher than the houses behind it. If you're in an area where the beachfront house happens to be at a higher base flood, then theoretically it could be 2 feet higher or something similar to that. So as I mentioned, there's a number of other ordinance changes in there, some things dealing with setbacks, dealing with some clarifications of items. I'm not going to bore you with those details. You have couple hundred-page book that I'm sure you're excited to go home and read. If there's anything specific, other questions that you have, we're happy to answer them. I think that the one comment that Rich made with regard to trying to get an understanding of what those bulkhead heights are versus existing grade and put some kind of context to that, I think that's something that's important. We can definitely do that.
And the book is 99% pictures, so there really isn't that much. Yeah, right. There's really not that much to go over, so everybody really should read every word in it.
Just about everything the board has to deal with is the last tab, ordinance review and recommendations. It's about 10 pages. That's really the crux of all the recommendations, and that's what you have to concentrate on. Sit down when you get home, sit down with your ordinance book and those 10 pages, and then mark them up and send recommendations to me about what changes, what you agree with, disagree with, what you want refined, and we'll get it to them, and then they'll put it into final format. So it's only really 10 pages. You can make comments on the other 150 pages, but they're basically not within the purview of the planning board.
Yes.
That's just informational. It really doesn't even have to be action on them, but you have to recommend to the commissioners the ordinance changes in those 10 pages. Okay. So that's your job.
I have a question.
Yes.
So, we really don't know if we're going to have dunes or not.
Correct.
At this stage. So if we were to have the oceanfront bulkhead at BFE +3,
No. The oceanfront bulkhead is at 13. There is no BFE.
the oceanfront property
Oh, property.
at BFE +3,
Correct.
in your vast wisdom, what would that look like? I mean, do we know, like, if
What do
we're
you mean by, what would look like from where?
from the first floor of an oceanfront property that's BFE +3? In other words, would that be high enough if, in fact, we end up with dunes?
If you have a dune, is the
Yeah.
question, could you see over the dune if you... Well, the proposal right now for the Army Corps of Engineers and the plans that we've seen, that we've reviewed, is that the top of dune is at elevation 12.75. Okay. For the most part, the oceanfront floor elevations, based on our recommendation, most of them will be at around 14.
And if
So-
there were dunes, would you need to go to BFE +3?
Some folks would argue not.
Right.
I would argue you still should do it.
Okay.
Yeah. And to answer your question about views, I mean, that puts your floor, roughly 1.5 feet above top of dune. So if you're sitting in a chair, you would be close.
It should elevate property values anyway, I mean, I would think.
In this context, I've said it a few times, in this context, higher is better. But we have to create the right balance between our surroundings. Yes, Glenn?
John, the promenade along the bay,
Yes.
that would require demolition of the buildings on the bay side of Amherst Avenue.
Well,
In your drawing, I didn't see any.
to achieve a bulkhead that is at the elevation that we're recommending, a continuous bulkhead for that entire area, those buildings would have to be elevated. Would they have to be demolished? No, but they would need to be elevated to allow that bulkhead to be built at that elevation.
So the buildings would be above the promenade?
Well, when you...
The promenade went all the way to Washington Avenue, didn't it?
Correct. Well, it's got to wrap around that Washington because that becomes private property in that area.
Oh.
Right, Arthur? Yeah. But yeah, in order to achieve the bulkhead elevations that we're talking about, those buildings would have to be elevated.
Did I understand you correctly? You're recommending that along the bayfront, the decks be at the same level as the floor?
We are recommending that the decks be permitted to be at the base flood elevation plus 2 feet. So in 90% of the cases, that would be equal to the finished floor. But if you have a location like in your current situation where you're requiring folks to look at the more restrictive of the ABFE map versus the preliminary firm map, that ABFE, the advisory flood elevation map, may require them to go higher. Now, you're seeing some applications like that. We're suggesting that we still want the decks to stay at the preliminary firm BFE +2, which basically puts 90% of the lagoons, as an example, at elevation 11.
Well, I don't think we want to require them to be at the same level as the floor for other reasons.
It's not, yeah, and that's a good point, Clem. It's, because I don't think I said that clearly. We're not requiring them to do it. We're giving them the ability to do it. So they're not, a deck is not governed by building code or a finished floor of a deck is not governed by building code like the finished floor of the house is, but we are allowing them to have the opportunity to raise that deck to get it out of harm's way. If they choose to build it lower, they still could.
Only one other question. Are there any engineering methods to actually put an extension on the top of a timber or one of these vinyl bulkheads that would actually function as a watertight barrier?
Since Sandy, I think we get asked that question almost on a weekly basis. There are some solutions, but they're not as good as a continuous sheet. I mean, we have developed for folks scabbing of sheets, splicing of sheets to get bulkheads higher. Are they as watertight as a continuous sheet that goes from 15, 20 feet below the mud up? No, they're not. But there are methods that you can elevate bulkheads to get them to a higher elevation that make them safer than their current condition, but obviously they are not as good as a continuous sheet.
That's what I thought. Thank you.
It's water. As soon as you cut a hole in it, water's going to find its way through. So.
Yes.
Any other questions? Do you have anything else? I think we're done.
All right, so where do we go from here, Roger?
Where we go from here is we have to set a time frame for getting your comments back to me so I can get it to them. We have to set a date for a public hearing, a special meeting other than a regular meeting, where they'll make a presentation to the public.
Would it be the same presentation as we had here for the public with any changes?
Yeah, as refined, we'll discuss the specific topics that you want to go through.
Okay.
But essentially, yes, this is a big conversation.
Okay.
After your comments are fed back to them and they make the changes, they'll publish a finished version of the book, an electronic version that'll be available online for the public to see before the meeting. We need to set a meeting in, I would say, November or early December, maybe the first week in December. When is our meeting in
17.
November? November's the 29th.
Right.
November's the last Thursday, it's the 29th.
December's the 17th.
Wait a minute, this is only September.
You don't need to wait that long.
No, you're right.
Date for the November meeting, right?
No, October is the 29th.
What about the first week in November?
The week after the planning board meeting in October.
Yeah.
The first Thursday in November. That's plenty of time for you to make the revisions based on what the planning board recommends.
That's a question, Art. If we schedule the next meeting for the first Thursday in November, does that give you time? And how much before that do you need our...
There's a commission meeting.
That's okay.
At 7 o'clock?
Receiving feedback.
That's the next question, the next answer.
We need a couple weeks
Yeah, when do you want the feedback to be ready for the first Thursday in November?
Just 2 weeks after the feedback, ready to go.
I'm going to send out a memo reminding you October 15th.
October 15th.
It's November 19th is our meeting.
First Thursday in November, what's that date?
The first Thursday in November?
November 5th will be a special meeting.
It's the 5th? All right, so November 5th will be the meeting,
Okay.
and October 15th is the deadline to get back to Roger with recommendations.
Okay, I'll send you a reminder memo. Recommendations are those 10 pages, anything else in the book, and also comments on the promenade design. Okay? Does that works for you, Arthur and John?
As I said, yes.
All right, so we're okay.
Anything else?
No.
We're done.
That's it for now.
All right, I need your motion to adjourn? Motion to adjourn?
Thank you very much.
Craig, do you second that motion?
Okay.
Dave?